My name's Adam Suckling. I'm the CEO of the Copyright Agency. I welcome you all here to this session on books that changed people's lives. It's in some ways a ridiculously big topic, but it does lend itself to good discussion. We came up with the idea of having these sessions and panels because a couple of years ago politicians were thinking of changing legislation which would have undermined the rights, in our view, of publishers and writers. And we wanted a way of clearly demonstrating to people in Canberra that this stuff, writing and telling stories, is important. And indeed, it's so important it can change people's lives. So that's what we've done. We did the first of these sessions here in Byron Bay about a year ago, and so we've taken it on the road. It's like having a little show. Gareth has done one before, and so have Josephine. So they're old hands. I'll introduce the panellists and then we'll get into it. So on my immediate right is Josephine Wilson. Her second novel, Extinctions, won the 2017 Miles Franklin Literary Award and the Colin Roderick Award, after also winning the inaugural Dorothy Hewitt Award in manuscript form. She talks about concrete making in a sort of amazing way in that book. It was, if you haven't read it, it was shortlisted for the Prime Minister's Award for Fiction in 2017. Josephine is from Western Australia, and her early works include the Geography of Horton Places and Customs. Her first novel was Cusp, and she teaches creative writing and the history of art and design. Please welcome Josephine. Next to Josephine is Chris Wormsley. His debut novel, The Low Road, won the Ned Kelly Award for Best First Fiction. His second novel, Bereft, won the Indie Award for Best Fiction, the Arbia Award for Literary Fiction, and was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, the Gold Dagger Award for International Crime, the Age Book of the Year Award, and the ALS Gold Medal for Literature. His latest book is City of Crows. Please welcome Chris. Thank you. And finally, on my far right is Gareth Evans, who, as you'll all know, was a central figure in Australian politics for over 2 decades. He was described by Bob Hawke as having the most acute mind of any of his ministers, which was saying something, given it was a very impressive cabinet, and has been awarded worldwide for his contribution as Foreign Minister and his international roles in conflict resolution, genocide prevention, and curbing weapons of mass destruction. Gareth, in a late-night interview many years ago, taught me the word interdiction. He kept using this word interdiction, and I thought, what does that mean? So thanks, Gareth. His current book, The Incorrigible Optimist, a political memoir, looks back over the highs and lows of his public life. Please welcome Gareth. Thank you. I will see how the panel's flowing. If we have time, we will throw to questions, but if they're all animated and you're enjoying it, we won't. We'll just sort of play it by ear, as they say. So, the first question to you, Gareth. What is the first book you remember either buying or reading or being read to you?
Enid Blyton, Noddy and Big Ears. I mean, my family, working class kid, we didn't do A.A. Milne, we didn't do Beatrix Potter, we didn't know about Kenneth Graham.
A bit posh.
But they were a bit posh. But we sure as hell knew about Enid Blyton. And that continued. I mean, not only I moved from Noddy and Big Ears, I mean, being sensitised, I guess, along the way to the first great gay relationship in children's literature. But then through into the famous five and the entire Irv, plus the entire William Irv, Richmond Crompton, and I guess the entire Captain W.E. Johns Biggles, which came back to haunt me rather in later life. But that was my childhood, that collection.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go there so early, the Biggles thing. I didn't think we were going there, Gareth, but you went there. What do you remember about it? Was it the gay relationship? Did you spot it, or was it just the pictures? Was it...
Oh, just the pictures, and I mean the quality of the writing, which librarians ever since have downplayed and said it was terrible. But I mean the vocabulary was just very sharp, very clear, very accessible to kids, and brought whole generations of kids into literature in the way that Harry Potter, I guess, is doing now to current generation. But Enid Blyton, in all her works, as badly written as they may well have technically been, had a really compelling narrative force about them, a clarity about them. The ones I didn't like about Enid Blyton were the fantasy ones, the Faraway Tree and that sort of stuff. I mean, which I know. I remember when I was sick as a little kid, my father, I said, please bring the latest Enid Blyton home to me from the library, and he brought the Magic Faraway Tree. And I thought this was complete crap.
Ripped off.
And I've not been good on fantasy ever since, but I like narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, because naughty is realism, right?
But she did the famous 5 books. Right, but you like the riffs on the famous 5 books, don't you?
Well, I mean, Famous 5 goes on giving. I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the latest series. 5 Give Up the Booze. 5 Go Gluten Free. This is fabulous stuff, and it continues to resonate.
All sounds good training for a foreign minister. Chris, what about you?
Well, I would stick up for the Magic Faraway Tree, actually.
People do.
Look,
People
I
do.
remember reading a book that I actually had to Google quite a while ago. It's called The Great Ghost Rescue. I don't know if anyone ever kind of read this. It was a picture book about a bunch of ghosts and ghouls living in an abandoned castle in Scotland, and some major corporation wants to build a massive sort of hotel on the site. So they go on
environmental
ethics. So they go on this kind of quest, and I don't know if I've got this right, but I have a feeling that they even go and visit the Queen, and they gather up all these ghosts and ghouls and like things. I can't remember the name of the main character actually off the top of my head, but it was one of those books that I kind of read and reread for one of those books I kind of returned to over a number of years. And if anyone here has read any of my work, you can perhaps tell the influence it may have had upon me, because I do like a bit of sort of ghoulish kind of action. But I liked the Faraway Tree. I like that kind of element of, I think, madness. Like you go up a tree. I was a big tree climber as a kid. I lived in a house that had a lot of trees, and I think I probably secretly wished to be taken away to, I can't even remember the name, Upside Down Land or whatever, or the guy who bangs himself with tin pots and all this kind of stuff. There's a sort of chaotic element to it. That,
and were they books that you read, or they were read to you?
I read them, I think. I would have read them myself. The main book I remember having read to me, I'll sort of talk about later. But and I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird when I was about 11 or 12 as well, which was my first kind of adult book, I guess.
Yeah. Josephine?
I can't remember the first book. I can't remember being read to. I'm glad my parents aren't here. I'm absolutely sure that I wasn't. I can't remember. My dad was never at home because he was always at work, and my mum had 4 kids and was harangued and harassed. And so I think she was just screaming at us to get to bed. And I think reading became a very private place for me. And I certainly probably read Enid Blyton, but I never had a passion for any of that. But I think my biggest influence was my grandmother, who, when we finally settled down after moving a lot as a very young child because of my dad's work, when we were in Port Hedland, we were in Liverpool, we were all over the spot. And I spent a lot of time outdoors, but when we arrived in Perth, my grandmother, who was in England, started sending books. And I think that no wonder, talk about colonial, I'm thinking back to Mallory Towers and all these kind of boarding school midnight feast stuff, and like thinking hockey sticks, jolly hockey sticks, and all this kind of perverse sort of
What's
English.
with the hockey sticks?
Oh, there was always hockey. I don't know. Was there? Or is it just my imagination? So I do remember a lot of hockey being played, and I never took to the sport myself, although my daughter's very good at hockey. But I think that reading was the first books that I really, really related to were the Narnia series, which a lot of people, were the Harry Potter of our generation. And I think I had a box set that my grandmother sent me, The Penguin, which is completely falling apart, but I still have. And I think I probably read each of those books about 10 times. And I love the picture, the images, the illustrations. I remember them as clear as a bell. But what I also remember is this emotional kind of moment where you might remember Susan, the oldest girl, is in one book, it's decided that Susan can no longer go to Narnia because she's become an adolescent and interested in fashion and makeup and boys. Therefore, she's banished from the fantasy world. And this, I can really remember this set off a struggle in me as a girl about, is that what it means? Are you giving up? Do you have to give up something? Do you lose something? Why is it considered belittling to become a girl, to become a woman? And I really honestly remember that. And that made a really big impression on me as a probably 12 or 11-year-old.
Wow. Yeah.
That why can't Susan still go? You know, because she's sort of peripheral and silly now, and she's lost the capacity to transcend her everyday life and enter the world of Narnia. So that made a really big impression on me.
What about Turkish Delight? I was always disappointed. Turkish Delight never
Turkish
tasted
Delight.
as good as they said it was in
Was
that
that
book.
with Mr. Tumnus? Did
No,
you
it
have
was the
Remember
Queen.
the
the
Queen?
Oh, that
had
dreadful, the
Turkish
Queen, the
Delight.
White Queen,
Yeah.
the Turkish Delight, of
Yeah,
course.
she's...
What did she have with Mr. Tumnus? He made something really delicious as well.
Wasn't that a drink? Anyway,
that a
but
drink?
Turkish.
Anyway.
Well, I'm sure there's people. Listen, if anyone knows the answer to that, just yell it up.
Yeah.
And the form, though, they were printed books sent in big envelopes by sea. Probably took 3 months to come.
Oh, marvellous. And
Yeah.
you'd unwrap them. And she used to send, she sent me this very early edition of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass that had belonged to her father. And they were leather bound and they're 18 something and they're beautiful. And the, you know, and it was really, I think, and also we did have a copy, I'm afraid, we did have Beatrix Potter. We had the full set in.
I've told you not to bring that up, Josephine.
I'm sorry,
No.
Gareth. It came from Grandma, and it was in a wooden case. It sits in a case, every book, and again, it was the font and the illustrations that drew me to it. It was the mixture of the image and the word.
Yeah, wow. All right, so we're going to move on to the sort of meat of the show, of the panel discussion, which is really, I'll ask each panellist, starting with you, please, Gareth, first, to talk about a book that changed their life, why it did, and read a passage from it.
Well, Machiavelli, the prince. Terrible reputation for unprincipled, cynical manipulation, trickery, but my God, it taught me a lot about politics. There's also a sophistication about it in terms of identifying the importance of politics and governance, which was a motivating factor. And also, of course, it taught me how, as an incorrigible idealist, nonetheless, you had to deal with a world of very unprincipled, cynical realists. It also changed my life in another very direct and immediate way. It was a set text for the modern history course when I was doing final year at school, and I did very well in that exam, got the state exhibition, after writing essays about Machiavelli's Prince. So that set me on the path to university, which I might not otherwise have done had I not won that scholarship that flowed from that. So it influenced me both in terms of the content and also in a very direct personal way. But he's an extraordinary writer, and there's a couple of very well-known passages that I think capture the flavour that everyone thinks they know about Machiavelli. Do you want me to read a couple
Please,
now?
yeah.
Is it better to be loved than feared, or the reverse? The answer is that one would like to be both the one and the other, but because it's difficult to combine them, it's far better to be feared than loved, if you can't be both. One can make this generalisation about men. They are ungrateful, fickle, liars and deceivers.
Yeah.
They shun danger and are greedy for profit. While you treat them well, they are yours. They would shed their blood for you, risk their property, their lives, their sons, so long, as I said above, as danger is remote. But when you're in danger, they turn away. Any prince who has come to depend entirely on promises and has taken no other precautions ensures his own ruin. Contemporary version of that, if you want a friend in politics, buy a dog. But
So
then
what,
there's the other famous passage.
Gareth, can I just ask you what precautions did you take then as you went into politics?
I bought a dog. Couldn't take it to Canberra with me, but there were plenty of other dogs around there. But let's move on to the other one. A prince need not necessarily have all the good qualities he's previously mentioned, but he should certainly appear to have them. I'd even go so far to say that if he has these qualities and always behaves accordingly, he'll find them harmful. If he only appears to have them, they will render him service. He should appear to be compassionate, faithful to his word, kind, guileless, devout. And indeed, he should be so. But his disposition should be such that if he needs to be the opposite, he knows how. Again, Groucho Marx, or could have been Tony Blair. Sincerity is everything. If you can fake that, you've got it made.
I nod sincerely. So, I mean, you look at, it's funny, you look at the Hawke government and the Keating government, and I guess you look back at governments and they seem super competent and to have achieved a lot. But they had all that Machiavellian stuff going on. Did you ever reread the book in Canberra, or was it just in your mind and you were too busy to do it, but you sort of had the...
Oh, what's in my mind, it's in the DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what you're doing. The point about the Hawke-Keating governments, I think, as though they had just as much personal ego clashing and ambition and Sturm and Drang as any government does, because you're dealing with very big personalities, very ego-driven personalities, often much more at the megalomaniacal end of the spectrum than the idealist end. Nonetheless, there was this sense of common purpose, and there was outstanding leadership. And there was leadership which was held to account and kept outstanding because the other members of the team, all of whom had a lot of respect for each other, demanded that they should. And the notion of the captain's picks or the personal frolics that we saw in subsequent governments just weren't there.
Yeah. And you managed to do it without ruling through Twitter, which is...
Oh, God.
Well, that helped.
Hard to
of course.
believe.
Of course, but I honestly think, the sense in which people say we're all now prisoners of 24/7 media cycles and the social media revolution, I think it's much more of an excuse than an explanation. And I think with serious, decent, quality leadership, listening to what people out there in the community are saying, including the people who feel they're being left behind by all these forces of technology and so on, I think politics could be conducted on a much better plane than it has been at the moment. But then I'm just a kloof. I'm a clapped-out old fart. So, I wouldn't know about this stuff, would I?
I didn't see that in my notes.
There's another new word for us.
Did you make that up? That's a really good...
I didn't make it up. I was first introduced to it by the former British Prime Minister Jim Callaghan when I was trying to persuade him back in government to join this big international commission on nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And he's like, I can't possibly do that, my dear fellow. I'm a kloof. What the hell's a kloof? And we went backwards and clapped out old fart. So I have to say it's served me very well in responding to blandishments subsequent. The trouble is, as you get older, there's less and less pushback, I find. But anyway.
#Kloof.
That's good.
Chris.
That's good. That's good.
Book would change your life, and read from it.
All right, well,
Tell
what
us
I'm
why.
going to do is going to read a little section from it first and see if anyone can pick what it is.
Oh, test.
Ooh, okay. You like that or you dislike
No,
it?
it's
I'm not
good.
quite sure. All right. Ours was marsh country down by the river, within as the river wound 20 miles of the sea. My first most vivid and broad impression of the identity of things seems to me to have been gained on a memorable raw afternoon toward evening. At such a time I found out for certain that this bleak place overgrown with nettles was the churchyard, and that Philip Pirrip, late of this parish, and also Georgiana, wife of the above, were dead and buried, and that Alexander, Bartholomew, Abraham, Tobias, and Roger, infant children of the aforesaid, were also dead and buried, and that the dark, flat wilderness beyond the churchyard, intersected with dykes and mounds and gates with scattered cattle feeding on it, was the marshes, and that the low leaden line beyond was the river, and that the distant savage lair from which the wind was rushing was the sea, and that the small bundle of shivers growing afraid of it all and beginning to cry was Pip. "Hold your noise," cried a terrible voice as a man started up from among the graves at the side of the church porch. "Keep still, you little devil, or I'll cut your throat." So that's Great Expectations, of course. And that happens within probably about the first 1,000 words of the book. So it's incredibly sort of dramatic opening. So Great Expectations was... Yeah, so I don't remember really being read to a lot as a little boy. have a sister with an intellectual disability, and the house was kind of chaotic and so forth. But my mum undertook this strange project to read me Great Expectations when I think I was about 10, which kind of seems slightly weird as I have an 11-year-old now. And I'm not entirely sure that we made it all the way through the book, but Magwitch, who's the character who threatens to cut Pip's throat, of course, is just I'm not sure whether it awakened something within me that was already present, as it might have been by my love of The Great Ghost Rescue, a kind of a love for the gothic and the ghoulish and to a degree the melodramatic, or it kind of appealed to me in a completely new way. But I think the way it changed my life is that it's in a way, I love the 19th century novel. Like, I still think it's, and by that I mean not only novels that are written in the 19th century, but like, Dickens and Bronte and, Dostoevsky and so forth, but the kind of novel that's kind of wide and generous. And Philip Roth writes 19th century novels. Zadie Smith, Donna Tartt writes a 19th century kind of brand of novel to a degree. And I really like, I feel like...
That scale.
Yeah, it's a scale, and it's also, I feel like it's a period prior to the sort of bifurcation, as it were, of literature into a sort of on the one hand, a serious literary pursuit, and on the other hand, a kind of an entertainment. Like, I think this was at a period when it was...
high and low lit kind of...
Yeah, it's all kind of there together, and I just really love that. Like, I'm kind of... I'm a bit sort of tired of a severe modernism that kind of in some ways rules the roost. It doesn't kind of speak to me a great deal. It's too cerebral for me.
Did it make
perhaps
you think you'd like to become a novelist? How did it? Did it make you look at the world in a different way, or think about telling stories in a different way?
I'm not sure if it made me look at the world in a different way necessarily, but it certainly kind of, I feel like it's an expansion of empathy and of a kind of a spiritual estate, if I can kind of put it in grandiose terms like that. And I feel like that's I still, this is maybe a terrible thing to say in some ways, but I still think the novel is the preeminent artistic form, and I don't say that because I'm an egomaniac and whatever. I don't think I'm great at it, you know what I mean, to a large extent compared to many, many others, but like it can take you anywhere and do anything that no other art form really can, I think, and on a scale that I'm not sure any art form really can, certainly a narrative form.
And so what are novels recently published? You mentioned a series of authors who you think do that well, or do that 19th century? I
think, look, I only discovered Philip Roth after he died. He kind of just passed me by, that kind of mid-century thing. And I read so much about, sort of like in a lull with my reading. He died. There were so many great eulogies, one of which was Zadie Smith, talking about him. And I thought, well, Zadie Smith likes Philip Roth. That's A-okay with me.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And I went on a bit of a Roth binge, and I'm actually reading American Pastoral at the moment. And it's just...
He's brilliant.
Amazing book. Like, it's kind of one of those books that... this is a bit off topic, but it's one of those books that sort of amazes me and thrills me, and also makes me feel dreadful about the paucity of my own talent in comparison. Not that, comparisons are always odious, obviously, but and it's not the kind of book I would ever really write. Like, it's so...
Is that the one with the... I'm sorry.
No, it was written in the late 90s, I think, and it's still kind of feels incredibly prescient in the sense that it's about a son of Jewish migrants who becomes this all-American kind of hero, a ball player and football player and so forth. And his daughter gets caught up with the Weathermen in the late 60s and early 70s and bombs a post office and becomes a terrorist, and he's this all-American guy who just, he marries Miss New Jersey, and he's this beautiful, handsome specimen and, the American dream, and he has this beautiful wife and house, and his daughter's a fucking psycho, or she, just gets caught up in the political moment. And, you could write that today. Like... Yeah. And I just think it's amazing.
It must be... It's strange you should mention that, because my wife has just finished reading that book and was saying very similar things. But one of the things she said was interesting to read about terrorism written at a time before 2001 or before 9/11, where it had a completely different sort of... I was going to use the word complexion, but there were different people doing it. It must be interesting reading that book now.
The other book, The Flamethrowers by Rachel Kushner. Have you read that? That's
yes.
an amazing
Was that
book.
the first one she did? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. She talks
That's
about
the one
political
set in
movement in
Italy.
Italy.
It's about futurism and terrorism.
And the Red
it's-
Brigade.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the Red
that's right.
Brigade. It's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah. But you're right. It is interesting, post 9/11, of course. And, of course, terrorism has existed for a long time. I mean, what's the... Oh, I've kind of lost my mind. There's another great 19th century novel about a terrorist act where they...
Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment.
Well, there's that, but there's also the one based on the plot to blow up Greenwich. Anyway, and they give the bomb to the autistic kid who trips over and blows himself up.
Wow. Does anyone know?
Anyway,
Okay.
It's a Conrad book, I think.
Conrad.
Anyway,
It's
Oh,
Conrad.
right.
The
Secret Agent.
The
Yeah.
Secret Agent. Yeah.
it's a terrific book.
Yeah. Well, Conrad is brilliant as well.
Another great 19th century novelist.
Yeah.
All right. Look, the problem with these panels with clever, interesting people is you feel like just, focusing on one person, but all of them are great. So I need to move to you, Josephine, please. Could you tell us about a book that changed your life, why, and read a section from it?
Well, as you can see from my little kind of presentation here, I was going to read from a particular book that, when you were talking about Dickens, I thought, no, I have to read from Bleak House, because Bleak House has got one of the most brilliant evocations of characterisation of weather and influence and the law through this idea of fog. And I found it very influential when I was writing my second novel, because I noticed that I think that it really influenced Rachel Cusk in Arlington Place, where the rain functions like the fog in her novel. And in my novel, the heat functions in the beginning like kind of going through everything. However, because of what's been discussed, I'll go back to what I was going to do. Because I want to take up that idea that, you read Philip Roth and you read these great vast books and you think, my life is not, or what I do is not enough. And I've always responded to that very much when I read Underworld, which is a DeLillo's book, which is the most incredible book. But and I remember that book starts with this extraordinary scene of a baseball game, a famous baseball game, at which all of the mafia are there, Frank Sinatra's there, the ball passes over, and you get this incredible kind of vast sense of history and politics and characters and famous people. And it's and it was called Super Omniscience by James Wood, I think, this idea that you can see and go everywhere. When I wrote my first novel, and one of the things I think in that book, a quote is, history on a grand scale is what makes humans what they are, or something. And when I wrote my first novel, Cusp, I wrote, my little piece at the beginning was that it was about history on a small scale. And I was trying to respond as a woman living in a kind of suburban setting to the idea of the domestic as a kind of lesser form, and how challenging it is as a woman and as a non-American writer to write from the point of view of place and to make the small resonate bigger. And that's really what I find, like I kind of can get overwhelmed by the big book. Yeah. But I think the point is that there's a kind of politics to that as well. And that to respond, I stand up for the smaller scale as well, and how the smaller scale can tell a bigger story just in the way it's done. Anyway, my book is a book called Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood, because it continues the interest. The first book that I read that really influenced me and changed me was Carson McCullers' A Member of the Wedding, which was written in the 40s, which is a beautiful small book about a girl called Frankie she's a Southern American writer who's on the cusp of adulthood. And my first book was called Cusp. And and what I became interested in is adult books about childhood. How childhood gets written about, but not as a kind of young adult fiction, as adults. And Margaret Atwood's book, Cat's Eye, tells the story of a painter called Elaine Risley, who comes back to Toronto for a retrospective. She's around 50, and she has to revisit her relationship with Cordelia, her friend at school, who was a monstrous girl who controlled her and it's sort of about gender, friendship, and all sorts of things. And it's the most... I'll read a little bit. So The character is written in the first person as a child. She is remembering. Her father's a scientist, and they spent their whole childhood travelling around, camping, looking for insects and collecting things in the forest. And she's never worn a dress. They've never really had a house. They camp. It's the 40s. After the war, there's not much around, and eventually her dad gets a job as an academic, and they move to Toronto, and that's where they get a house, and she goes to school for the first time, and she learns. Okay, on Saturday I no longer go to the building. Instead I play with Carol and Grace. Because it's winter, we mostly play inside. Playing with girls is different, and at first I feel strange as I do it, self-conscious, as if I'm only doing an imitation of a girl, but I soon get more used to it. The things we play are mostly Grace's idea, because if we try to play anything she doesn't like, she says she has a headache and goes home, or else tells us to go home. She never raises her voice, gets angry or cries. She is quietly reproachful, as if her headache is our fault. Because we want to play with her more than she wants to play with us, she gets her way in everything. We colour in Grace's movie star colouring books, which show the movie stars in different outfits, doing different things, walking their dogs, going sailing in sailor suits, swirling around in evening dresses at parties. Grace's favourite movie star is Esther Williams. I have no favourite movie star. I've never been to a movie, but I say mine is Veronica Lake because I like the name. Veronica Lake book is paper doll cutouts, with Veronica Lake in her bathing suit and dozens of outfits you can stick onto her with tabs that fold around her neck. Grace won't let us cut out these outfits, although we can put them on and take them off once she's done, but we're allowed to work away at her colouring books as long as we stay inside the lines. She likes to get those books all coloured in. She tells us what colours to use on what parts. I know what my brother would do: green skin for Esther with beetle antennae and hairy legs for Veronica, 8 of them, but I refrain from doing it. Anyway, I like the clothes. We play school. Grace has a couple of chairs and a wooden table in her cellar and a small blackboard and chalk. These are set up underneath the indoor clothesline where the Smith underwear is hung up to dry when it rains or snows. Grace is always the teacher, Carol and I the students. We have to do spelling tests and sums and arithmetic. It's like real school, but worse, because we never get to draw pictures. We can't pretend to be bad because Grace doesn't like disorder. Or we sit on the floor in Grace's room with piles of old catalogues, Eaton's catalogues. I've seen lots of Eaton's catalogues before. Up north, they hung in outhouses for use as toilet paper. Eaton's catalogues remind me of the stench of such outhouses, the buzzing of the flies around the hole underneath, the box of lime, the wooden pattern for dumping the lime down onto the old piles of recent droppings of all shades and colours of brown. But here we treat catalogues with reverence. We cut the small coloured figures out and paste them into scrapbooks. Then we cut around them. The figures themselves are always women. We call them my lady. My lady's going to have this refrigerator, we say. My lady's getting this rug. This is my lady's umbrella. Grace and Carol look at each other's scrapbooks and say, oh, yours is so good. Mine's no good. Mine's awful. They say this every time we play the scrapbook game. Their voices are wheedling and false. I can tell they don't mean it. Each one thinks their own lady on the page is good, but it's the thing you have to say. So I have to say it too. I find this game tiring. It's the weight, the accumulation of objects, these possessions that would have to be taken care of, packed, stuffed into cars, unpacked. I know a lot about moving house, but Carol and Grace have never moved anywhere. Their ladies live in a single house, each and always have lived there. They can add more and more, stuff the pages of their scrapbooks with dining room suites, beds, stacks of towels, one set of dishes after another, and think nothing of it. And I begin to want things I've never wanted before: braids, a dressing gown, a purse of my own. Something is unfolding, being revealed to me. I see there's a whole world of girls, and their doings have been unknown to me, and that I can be part of it without making any effort at all. I don't have to keep up with anyone. I have to keep up, run as fast, aim as well. I don't have to think about whether I've done these things well as a boy. All I have to do is sit on the floor, cut frying pans out of the catalogue with embroidery scissors, and say I've done it badly. That partly this is a relief.
That's great. Why did you select, I mean, aside from the fact it's very funny, why did you select that passage?
I selected that passage because it's brilliant. It brilliantly captures that kind of relationship between girls. And I remember my daughter saying to me, coming home and saying, "Oh, I just can't stand it." And I said, "What's wrong, Dee? What's wrong, May?" And she said, "Well, they were all pretending they're bad at everything and they're really good at it. And everyone goes, 'Oh, I'm really bad at maths.' And they says, 'No, you're not. You're really good.' And then everybody's and all the girls are playing out this kind of pathetic kind of need to denigrate yourself in front of another so they can reassure you. And then you, and when I was rereading this book because I'm interested in how you write about that period of transformation of a girl from the point of view of an adult, I came upon this and I thought, this is just brilliant. This is how it is. And this is a book, she's representing, Margaret Atwood here is representing the 40s, the early, but yet, despite everything, girls still play out these sublimating kind of weird sort of things between each other where you can't assert yourself. You can only be powerful by someone else reassuring you when you say you're not. They're saying, yes, you are. Yes, you are. And I find that really, that's why I chose it.
Okay. Very good answer, Harvey. Nothing to add.
Why is it called Cat's Eye?
Because the marbles, the cat's eye. She has this wonderful thing about marbles in the kid childhood. Yeah.
All right, so we'll move on to the next question. I know this might strain credulity, but I'm going to ask Gareth, assuming Donald Trump could read, what book would you recommend to him?
Well, I don't think I'd risk giving him The Prince of Machiavelli. I would try to appeal to the better angels of his nature. I doubt if they exist, but I would try. And I think there's one magic way of communicating that, and that's getting him to read Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. Of all the people I've met in my public life, international life, unquestionably the most impressive, leaving aside Kevin Rudd, unquestionably the most impressive has been Nelson Mandela.
Had some nice things to say about Mark Latham earlier.
Just an absolutely magical human being in the compassion, the dignity, the presence. Just that line of his from the Rivonia trial, which everyone will remember as very famous, but just getting this into Donald Trump's head, that I fought against white domination, and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It's an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it's an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Getting some message like that into that thick, narcissistic, buffoonish head would maybe just contribute a little bit to making the world a safer and saner place. I spent an hour and a half with him, and it was simply the most memorable and moving experience in my life. That someone who had been through 27 years of incarceration, I mean, everybody said it's become a cliche, but the absolute capacity for forgiveness, the larger vision, the sense of what the main game was, the sense of humanity, just absolutely extraordinary, and just the dignity with which he carried himself, and just the humanity, the decency. That picture's on the steps of the Sydney Opera House when he visited Australia a couple of years later to thank us for the role that we had played, which was quite substantial, through developing the idea of financial sanctions and so on to put pressure on the regime. And, just sitting up there alongside him with thousands of people, just a magic moment. He's a magic person, and we're celebrating, of course, this week the 100th year of his birth, and there's been no one before him or since, I think, with that kind of majesty and that kind of humanity.
Yeah. Thank you. Chris, what would you tweet to Donald
I'm
that
stuck
he read?
on imagine if Donald Trump could read, because I honestly just don't think he has any like he could I feel like he's the kind of person that you could recommend all sorts of great things to, that he would just not. I don't know.
Maybe you could start with Noddy and Big Ears.
I think he'd be a Noddy guy more than a faraway tree guy, but I really don't know what on earth I could recommend that might do him or us the slightest bit of good, to be honest.
It's flummoxing.
It is. Have you got any ideas?
Well, I kind of, probably from what Gareth said, rather than Noddy, I would if Harry Potter has this power over boys to get them reading, let's get him reading. Let's get him onto Harry Potter, and that keep him busy for if he gets into it. Could give us some time out.
Well, probably taking about 5 years.
It'd take, I just think instead of all that tweeting, he'd be, at the meetings in the car, kind of like,
You'd never get him past the cupboard under the stairs. I mean, that's two pages in. That's right.
And there is that sort of great line about your life is not about the talent that you have, but the choices that you make.
Yes.
It's not just about kind of doing what you have to do or whatever. It's about kind of deciding the correct thing to do and stuff.
I think he should start with Harry Potter.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Gareth's right, though, he'd say, Harry Potter, this bloke's a loser. He lives under the stairs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he wouldn't want to see. He couldn't identify with. The problem is identification. As a child, you usually do attach yourself to a character in some way. Who is he going to attach
Particularly
himself
an orphan.
to?
Yeah. Well,
Not Hermione, that's for sure.
Hermione is a bit whiny.
Oh, come on. She's clever.
Yeah, that's a bit tough.
Oh, dear.
Let's not get started.
Right, okay, well, moving on. So, look, we've got 15 minutes more. I've got a couple of big questions because we've asked such huge, ridiculously big questions. I thought I'd ask another one. And the panel's all being very gracious and intelligent in their answers. So, Gareth, a book that changed the world.
Oh, no.
A book that did change the world.
Oh, okay.
Good grief, we're going up.
Or anyone
Why
else?
didn't you give us advance notice of that?
I think he did.
Put that in the... I'm sure that was in the email.
I don't know.
The Bible?
Well, yeah, but I don't want to concede that.
Okay, right. The Quran?
I don't know. There's books that have changed bits of the world and people's perception of bits of the world all around the place. I mean, some people here might remember back in the 60s Maxim Rodenson's Penguin special, Israel and the Arabs, which was something that completely cut through to many of my generation, not everybody obviously, that sense of comparative injustice and people realising for the first time it wasn't just doing justice to the Jewish people for the unbelievable horrors of the Holocaust. It was also a matter of doing simultaneously justice to the Palestinian people who were dispossessed. And that was a very important game changer in the 1960s and onward, certainly in the Australian political debate. You're not seeing much signs of it now. But lots and lots of individual books like that.
I kind of tend to think of books as changing the world. Oh, God, it sounds so kind of trite, but it's kind of one person at a time kind of thing. Like, for me, as sort of a book, certainly when I write novels, it's about... I envisage the ideal reader as being a kind of 17-year-old version of me to a degree, of someone in their room kind of hiding out and sort of travelling to other places and whatever. And I think in terms of... changing the world, it is, I guess, what I was sort of saying before, an enlargement of our kind of empathetic and spiritual estate to a degree, to kind of learn about other places, which is perhaps why it's kind of so hard to envisage Donald Trump kind of engaging in the practice, yeah.
And there are books you can think of that did that for you, that
Look, I mentioned before, like reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I know it's a sort of a corny answer in a way, because it's just such a sort of a totemic book, but I do remember reading it lying in a hammock camping at a place called Hat Head, which is near Kempsey, which we used to go to when I was a kid, and I felt like I had crossed into adulthood a little bit, in the same, very much the same way that Scout does in the book. It's this kind of like this transition period. And it's sort of the trial by fire and learning these sort of difficult moral lessons and stuff. And so that was a sort of a book that I feel like I still have the same copy. It sort of won me over.
Josephine?
Like Gareth said, or the world is a very big place in many languages and cultures. So if you say the Bible, you have to say the Quran, or well, you can't. I don't go there. I think something like The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir, Solzhenitsyn, the Gulags. books that opened up our perception of the truths in places. I remember I had a copy which I didn't really understand of Schumacher's book, in Small is Beautiful. Books about Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's book. Great books about the environment that even if I didn't really read them, I mean, I kind of intuited their meaning or absorbed the crisis of that time, whether it was the 70s or whatever. I never really understood what was going on with Solzhenitsyn, but I remember reading it my dad had it and looking at it and reading it, thinking, well, what's this about? And asking my dad, what, and I think those kind of books had an enormous, huge impact.
Just one other thought in terms of a book that fundamentally changed the way we think about the world and humans' place in Charles Darwin, Origin of Species.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was just an absolute intellectual game changer.
The Communist Manifesto?
Well, Communist Manifesto, yes, for a period. Mein Kampf,
Yeah.
from another point of view, for a period.
Yeah.
But in terms of just fundamentally transforming about the way in which we think about our role with the rest of nature, the rest of the world. I mean, Origin of Species just remains. And Galileo, of course, going back in history before that, our place in the cosmos. But anyway, it's an interesting question. And maybe others in the audience will have their own views on that. Shouldn't we start asking?
You should, indeed. Thank you, Gareth, timekeeper. You can see Gareth has chaired a lot of meetings. Get on with it. So, we have 10 minutes left, as one of our panellists has pointed out. And I will have
They're
to
all
have
leaving
a
now,
long
yeah.
thank you. So, are there any questions? Look, I saw Tony Jones at breakfast. He's famous for, I'll take that as a statement, if you're asking a question, please make it pithy and direct and not a statement. So, are there any mics roving, organisers? There's a mic over there. So just wave your hand if you want to ask a question at
They will probably want to get to the next session. Oh.
I wonder if I could ask Gareth, if you move Machiavelli to 2018, think about what he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, where will we put him?
Where we put him, scale of 1 to 10 in terms of what he adds value, or
In terms of how he explains today's structure of power and use of power.
well, pretty high, I think, because there's an enormous amount of cynicism. There's an awful amount of unprincipled behaviour, lowest common denominator, pitching behaviour, not arguing to the better angels of our nature but our worst. And I mean, Machiavelli, just did pin that with extraordinary precision. He shouldn't be taken as necessarily believing any of these things are good things, but he sure as hell was incredibly good at identifying those hypocrisies, the double standards, the dishonesty, and saying you've got to do some of this to stay in power. And we can certainly see multiple political leaders around doing just that. The Orbáns in Hungary, the Trumps, and so on. But so, I mean, as a description of what, not a prescription, but a description of what's going on, very relevant indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. There any other questions? I'm sure there are. Anyone else? Anyone at the back there?
Have to go back to your big questions.
Here's another.
So, what about a book that might have changed your perception as an Australian in relation to where we sit in relation to our Indigenous brothers and sisters? I can think of My Place by Sally Morgan, changed me.
Well, I can think of Henry Reynolds' history books, actually very, very important. A whole series of them just completely recasting our understanding of what happened when the white settlers arrived. It wasn't just Indigenous people melting away. It was genuine resistance, genuine passionate commitment to land, to soil, to territory, to the then equivalent of sovereignty, and passionately fought over. And that's a very important part of our history, which before Henry Reynolds, I think more than anyone else, started writing about it, was completely unacknowledged. That then fed through into, I think, the movement towards recognition of native title and some of the other stuff that's going on. We haven't effectively delivered on our responsibilities, but I think we're much more aware of them as a result.
I actually last in Perth Festival, that was the book I chose as a book that changed, the Sally Morgan book. But I think I remember reading Robert Drew's Savage Crows, which was I don't know what year that was written, but that was an early kind of representation attempt to kind of engage with the idea of resistance and genocide, Indigenous genocide from a white writer. That was quite influential, I think.
I remember reading.
Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, I remember reading The Savage Crows a long time ago as well, but I can't actually remember a lot about it now, to be honest.
Yes.
The book that comes to my mind is Inga Clendining's Dancing with Strangers. I don't know if you've read that, but that's she was a Melbourne historian, and she wrote mostly about Aztecs. It was a speciality, but then she wrote this book about the Captain Cook and Philip Cumming. And I was asked in one of these sessions, what's a book that changed your life? And that changed mine because it made me look at Sydney in a completely different way. You thought, to Gareth's point, fuck, there were all these wars here and all this stuff happened and it's all around you. And she tells that story in an amazing way. And, she's such a good historian. It's all very meticulously researched.
Bruce Pascoe.
True. And there's the great ballet that the Bangarra dance group are doing. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? We've got time, I think, for one more, if it's on the, tip of your tongue. There's one up there at the back.
Hi. I just wanted to ask Josephine, as a 16-year-old girl, I'm just just getting through life still, still in high school, and I just wanted to know a book that you think is really essential for teenage girls especially to read.
Extinctions.
No. Oh, well, no. What a good question. But can I say that? A rhetorical question with a question? What a good question. I don't know. It depends. You see, I think reading is a lot to do with genre and what genres you read. I mean, I think I'm just going to go to the book that was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin by... I'm just going to think of who it was. Come and see me. I'll tell you in a second. Just I'll come and find you because I don't want to put myself in a kind of brain space. I can't think of it. But yeah, there are books. But I mean, it really is about what you like, what you love, what you want to read, and genre probably is the most important thing. Emily Maguire's books are very good. Emily Maguire's book, the last one that was set in the country about the murder of a young woman, is very good.
An isolated incident.
Yeah, an isolated incident. Do you think that's a...
Yeah, that could...
Is that too...
I don't know. I just sent my 16-year-old niece a copy of The Secret History, but I'm not entirely sure that that's
yeah. That could be... Well, that could be a book to read, yeah. Handmaid's Tale.
Okay, so... I'm just going to ask you about that.
I think I read that when I was pretty young.
So there's two more questions. We keep them quick because we've only got 3 minutes.
Hi. How do you write a book that will change someone's life?
You can't.
Yeah. I think you just got to set out to write whatever you feel you want to write about, and if someone, sort of like casting seed to an extent, and some people kind of take it up and enjoy and feel some kind of empathy and relationship with the book, and it leaves others cold. I mean, I think it's it's very difficult.
Well, in my case, I'm talking about non-fiction, of course, but my own book is about, among many other things, the personal experiences I had, the travel experiences I had in Vietnam and Cambodia and all sorts of places, and how that comprehensively changed the way in which I thought about the world and what needed to be done to fix it. And I think if I can communicate in my book some of the sense of excitement that I had about coming to grips with other countries, other cultures, other people in that context, maybe I can just encourage some people in the next generation to embark upon that same sort of journey and believe that they can make a difference.
Yeah. Okay, last question.
Just following on from the question about girls and a book that influenced girls, personally I found the Tim Winton, Lockie Leonard books helped more boys through puberty than practically any Australian book written, and I'm wondering whether any of you have other suggestions for books that would help boys, particularly at that 12 to 14 age.
I'm a bad influence. One of my sort of other very strong memories of reading was reading All Quiet on the Western Front when I was still in primary school, and I used to read out the goriest sections to the girls in class, which is perhaps an indication of my future career. Yeah, and Dostoevsky, he's always good for helping boys navigate adolescence.
Contemporary writers, I think Patrick Ness is a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
And my son read Patrick Ness when he was going through that 13-year... My daughter's just read all the Patrick Ness. I think, and I mean, that book that he wrote about... I can't remember the name. About the one that was the monster one.
Monster Calls.
The Monster Calls is the most extraordinary book. In fact, you should read that, The Monster Calls. It's not. I don't. It's about a boy and his mother, and who's dealing with death, and it's a brilliant book.
And the movie's great too.
I haven't seen the movie. It's
The
really
movie
good,
is so
it?
moving.
Oh,
You
is it?
cannot watch that movie without crying.
I just was devastated by that book.
Maybe,
All right.
maybe it's just nostalgia, but I'd encourage him to read Biggles.
Oh,
Okay, on that very high note, that funny note, can I thank all of you for coming? You were an absolutely terrific audience, attentive, and you laughed and engaged, so thank you very much. Can I thank Gareth? Can I thank Chris? Can I thank Josephine? Could you all thank them too, please?
Thank you.